Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where we take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of big finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 22nd of July, 2019, we're starting to look at the first story of Season 17, and the final story to be written by Terry Nation, and the first story with Douglas Adams, the script editor, Destiny of the Daleks, starting with Episode 1. Now, let's start right at the beginning. Let's get the big controversial scene out of the room, Romana's regeneration. The regeneration scene itself is played more for laughs. The whole idea is that Romana tries on a bunch of different bodies before settling on one. It all seems to be done on a joke, and yeah, the gags they're actually great gags. The doctor basically says, like, too tall, too short, things like this, before deciding on being Lalla Ward, aka the body of Princess Astra from the Armageddon Factor, so Lalla Ward becoming the new Romana. But what is interesting is that the story itself we get that it's all a small scene, and it's not necessarily the worst scene in the show. It's a funny scene, and it's a lot of fun. It gives us a good introduction to Romana, the new Romana, as a character, and after that, it really just works kind of as a prologue, because moving on, this first episode itself is one where not a lot necessarily happens. A lot of it is the Doctor and Romana wander around a quarry for a decent amount of time, because why not? They see a spaceship land. Romana finds sort of a ruined city. They both find a ruined city. They go down. Romana falls down a hole. Daleks burst out of the side, and shout at Romana, "Do not move. You are our prisoner," which in what is another example of Terry Nation doing a really bad cliffhanger for his first episode. Now, why do I say this? Because we all already know the Daleks are in this story. They are the ones that are credited in the title sequence. This story is called Destiny of the Daleks. The Daleks are here. We even found out earlier that this planet is Skaro. It's not. This isn't really. This isn't really one of those stories that, you can get away with that sort of a big cliffhanger, mainly because just as a cliffhanger it doesn't work. That being said, there are a couple of points in this story that are good. There's a lot of comedy here, which is really nice. Lalla Ward, for her debut episode, June Hudson, the costume designer, must be applauded. She gives Romana this really nice costume that is very much almost an homage to the Fourth Doctor's, with the long coat and scarf in pink and white. It's actually very, very nice, and a very, very nice change to see Romana in a really good sort of practical costume. also, just Lala Ward in her first episode immediately makes herself out to be different than Mary Tam's portrayal of the character, mainly because Mary Tam's portrayal of the character was much more, was sort of inexperienced. This Romana is more upper class, it seems, and a bit more, just a bit more, just a bit more sort of willing to repartee with the Doctor, sort of an evolution of Mary Tam's character, while also making it her own. She and Tom Baker have great chemistry. We also get introduced to the Movellans here, which we don't actually, which they are basically, humanoids that are extremely strong, that are on the planet for a specific mission. On the Movellans, I'm going to be honest, their design is one of those really campy. They are people in white jumpsuits with silly hair. That's all they are. Really, they're not in terms of alien design the greatest. They're just kind of standard. And all they do in this first episode is like land on the planet and be like, yeah, this is Skaro. Again, the big issue here is that there's very little that actually happens in part 1 of Destiny of the Daleks. It's really just sort of an average. It's an average episode. It's really only brought up to any bit of enjoyment because of Tom Baker and Lala Ward are getting their characters together. Even then, those moments seem to be few and far between, mainly because they're already there. So overall, I'm going to give Destiny of the Daleks Part 1 a 5 out of 10. All right, it is the 23rd of July 2019, and I just finished watching episode 2 of Destiny of the Daleks. Now, episode 2 of Destiny of the Daleks is when you really get to see quite a lot of where the where the Movellans sort of come from. There's this mystery about the Movellans. Like, the Doctor isn't allowed to see them after they fall over and potentially die. Romana is attempting to, the Doctor attempts to help. They don't allow it. Whereas a lot of this episode is a runaround, but a fun runaround. You sort of have this intrigue that the Daleks are searching Skaro for something. And that something at the very, very end of the episode is revealed to be Davros in a shocking twist. Davros, who was pretty blatantly killed at the genesis of the Daleks, is the big cliffhanger is that for whatever reason, Davros starts to reboot. He's alive. His fingers move. His eye lights up. He doesn't say anything, but he just starts to move, and that is the image of Davros as completely, just completely put under, just completely under this, this big, under this, sort of quote unquote, I guess you could call it, just sort of piece of destruction, where he is dead. He is dead. but then he wakes up. That's a genuinely good cliffhanger, and I can applaud Terry Nation for executing it well. And I applaud Ken Grieve. Now, a lot of the issue here is that, one, the resolution to the episode 1 cliffhanger is Romana just gets captured. The Daleks threaten to exterminate her at several points during the story, but, she just gets captured, and they don't do too much with it. They're just like, where, it's one of those things where you really, really don't get, you don't get the biggest sort of, you don't get the biggest, sorts of just plot elements here. You get Romana being in a cave, for a while, being a work crew, dying, getting close to death, getting weaker, collapses, pretends to die, gets her body removed, and then meets up with the doctor. And this character, Tyson, who is a fun character, and he's played by an actor called Tim Barlow, who wasn't in, who was only ever in this story. But what's interesting is that he's actually a deaf. At this time, he was deaf, and he actually gives a really good performance. There are a couple of moments where you have to deal with Tom Baker altering the script because it's Tom Baker, and that's what Tom Baker does. So having an altered script makes it more difficult for him to work with. But he does a good job at acting, at acting whilst deaf and creating this character a really nice voice. But then it's basically then it's basically the story goes on to explore the cave, find Davros. There's a rock fall, which has one of the Movellans who went with them get killed. Now, what else is interesting is that there's just, you have, it feels almost like a treasure hunt to find Davros when Davros eventually does get found by the end of this episode. But sadly, there's a lot of space here, where you really don't need a lot of the quote unquote space. You'd be pretty fine with just, cutting things and getting going, get things going sooner, and getting the story to really, to the conclusion quicker as they can. You have the this is you have a story that, there's this even point where the doctor taunts a Dalek that it can't go upstairs. It's like saying, try climbing up. You really, you feel like you're missing something. It's just, it's enjoyable. It's better than that first episode. The first episode, which was just sort of meh, and it's a good episode. Terry Nation could possibly save this story, if he tries hard enough, because you know the story which could use saving. You have, but you have a really because you have a really decent start. You have by now we are actually getting into the story. This feels like it might have been written for either 6 parts and has been crushed down, but not crushed down well enough. Like the first episode was remained completely intact, whereas this is like episodes 2 and 3, and maybe a bit of 4, which is just weird. It's it's one of those things where you really get the sense that there might have been more meant to be here. That just isn't. But overall, it's a good episode. So I'm going to give Destiny of the Daleks episode 2 a 6 out of 10. Alright, it is the 23rd of July 2019, and I just finished watching episode 3 of Destiny of the Daleks. This is the episode which sadly goes off the rails, at least a little bit. Mainly in that this is the episode where Davros wakes up, and in waking up, we really get to see David Gooderson's performance, and David Gooderson as Davros really lets this story down. The character of Davros here is, well, first off, for whatever reason, the chair doesn't move nearly as smoothly. You can really tell that it's, David Gooderson's the one making the chair move. It looks like it looks kind of like it's going to be falling apart. You have you have this weird sort of idea that you have you have Davros, like the Doctor literally has to push him, and it's weird. Also, David Gooderson as Davros, he's not actually using like any sort of voice. He's just he's just kind of using he's just kind of using it feels like he's kind of using his own voice, and not really giving a solid performance. It's a real step down after you had Michael Wisher's extreme megalomania in Genesis of the Daleks. It's honestly it's a weird performance. It's one where you really think there's a lot of stuff. Also, oddly enough, just you really see this is that the production on Davros here, like his mask for Gooderson is it doesn't fit. It obviously doesn't fit. It's like it feels like the budget was blown, yet what's even weird is that the budget couldn't have been blown, because this is near the beginning. This is the beginning of the season, and two, the Daleks are just repaints of older ones, and you can tell because like the Daleks themselves look pretty beaten down as well. A lot of this story looks beaten down, but what also doesn't help is that this episode is one that really not a whole lot happens. It's a lot of the Doctor and Davros talking for the first half. Like the Doctor even, like, there's this point where the Doctor just finds this random explosive, basically so he can blow up Davros, but he uses it to blow up a Dalek. Like it's a really weird section, and there's this weird revelation that these Daleks are now completely robotic. Mainly because it feels like Terry Nation was trying to write a story about robots. It's one of those. It's one of those weird sort of things, because the Movellans are a race of robots as well, just like which is again also just a weird sort of like, oh, here's this revelation that doesn't really make much sense. It's like, oh, so you have you have robots, and there's big cliffhanger is that is 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 this big Romana gets put into a Nova device, which is meant to take turn all the particles in the air flammable, and then just firebomb all the life forms, which is... Oh, again, this is just a story where you get a bunch of these weird elements that really don't make much sense. I think the idea is that they're trying to build up the Movellans as not, not the good guys, even though it's already, even though it's already been pretty, it's been pretty well established that they're it's been pretty well established that they're not they're not in the right here. They're not good characters overall. I mean, also this episode, Romana becomes a damsel in distress and has very little to do with, which basically amounts to her part becoming just sit in the corner and kind of talk about how brilliant the Doctor is. It's the third episode that it's really weak. It just doesn't quite know what it wants to be, if it's gonna be a serious big Dalek story, if we're gonna build up this war. If not, so overall I'm going to give Destiny of the Daleks episode 3 a 4 out of 10. It is the 24th of July 2019, and I just finished watching episode 4 of Destiny of the Daleks, where we get this big it's... One, the cliffhanger resolution is really bad. It's like, oh, it wasn't actually primed. That was just a trick so we could knock the Doctor out. I mean, okay, that's, like, yes, it makes sense that it's, like, that's an easy solution, but it almost feels too easy, like, yeah, that's like, yes, this is what we were doing. We weren't really finishing a story. No, it's, we were just, pranking you pretty much so we could get you where we want you. And that genuinely leads to some really nice, actually, probably basically the highlight of the episode, which isn't saying much because as an episode, this episode it's bad. It's an episode that you get the story built up to, and then you just sort of, it's like, oh, we did this. We didn't really do much. Like, the Daleks end up blowing themselves up, which is, nice to see. It's nice to see, the Daleks exploding because, well, they're Daleks. What do you want? I mean, there's a decent amount of action. You can do an action-packed Dalek story. But this one, the idea is that the Movellans and Daleks have been caught in a conflict because they are completely logic-based. Slight problem with that. The Daleks aren't creatures of logic. Like, the idea is that, oh, they're now robots. They've evolved into just pure robots, which I don't think that's how evolution works. And two, why do they need Davros then to give them an advantage, even though they're robots? Yeah, it's very much a story that's like, Terry Nation wrote himself into a corner. Like, Davros doesn't even die at the end. He's just taken off to prison. The creator of the Daleks, one of the most evil evil beings in the universe is taken off to prison purely for the sequel bait. Like, we've already the stories this story already established that Davros can resurrect, because Davros was just shot dead at the end of Genesis because he wasn't meant to come back. So they brought him back for and then they decided we're bringing him back for Destiny. Also, David Gooderson, he doesn't do a good job as Davros. He's like, he uses his normal voice, just kind of shouts. You don't feel sort of like that little bit of modulation that you did with Michael Wisher. Like, it feels like they did Davros. They were trying to do Davros as cheaply as possible, because he's a smaller character, even though he could easily be taking up like his entire story. This story could really do a lot, but it's like, oh, and the Daleks get blown up. We're moving on. The Movellans leave because I guess that means they won their war. I guess it's the implication being that all the Daleks on Skaro were literally all the Daleks. Like, is that what that like the Daleks are defeated, our war is over, let's go home. In what is just, it's a weird ending for the story. And once again, Lala Ward as Romana doesn't do much, which is a shame after her first episode had her impressed. Like, she's just there to sort of demonstrate rock, paper, scissors. Like, you have this whole thing where the Doctor tries to get the Movellans to play rock, paper, scissors to explain why they can't win against the Daleks, because they're both two machines of logic trapped in an eternal battle, which, yeah, okay, it's a good scene. It's pretty humorous, but as a scene, it isn't necessary. It's one of those stories that you really feel like it's it's one of those stories where you just sort of you get this ending, and it's not great. It's just sort of a sad ending. You just sort of, they blow up and that's it. Still, it's at least it's okay. I mean, the direction actually looks pretty nice. Ken Grieve sets up shots pretty nice. Also, though, honestly, this is a story where it's like, here's a bunch of Daleks, even though even though the Daleks are really bad props, they're repainted this gray, and it feels like when they blew them up, this was just an excuse to blow them up. It's one of those. It's one of those stories where you just have just sort of this sad ending. Overall, it's pretty okay. It could have been pretty good. It's just not. It's just a bad story. So overall, I'm going to give Destiny of the Daleks Episode 4 a 3 out of 10. Then we add up the 4 episodes and average them out to give Destiny of the Daleks a final score of 4.5 out of 10. Thank you everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And join me next time when we take a look at the second story from Season 17 and the first instance of overseas location footage filming for Doctor Who in City of Death.